Across the world, people have their housing costs taken away as much as half of their income. Have you ever thought of trying to change that? The good news is there is a way. House hacking is real, and we are here to show you how other people just like you have made it happen. Welcome to the House Hacking Podcast. And here is your host, house hacking expert, Andrew Kerr.
All right, I'm really excited about today's guest. Cami is a rock star serial entrepreneur. She got her start in advertising, working in boutique firms in Raleigh, Miami, and then San Francisco. You know, she started the first gluten-free bakery in San Francisco way back in 2003, which was called Crave, and she started that after discovering gluten was making her sick. She subsequently wrote a cookbook of the same name that still sells on Amazon and Apple Books. She also started a marketing consulting company in Durham back in 2012. Then she began her real estate investing and development career in around 2014, and she did that with starting her first house hacking project. And that's also about the time we roughly met. We met at a real estate meetup and sort of became fast friends over the past several years. So, Cami, thanks for coming on and your willingness to share your story. I'm excited to start talking with you.
Hey, Andrew. It's great to talk with you.
So where are you actually calling in from today?
I'm calling from Portland, Oregon, where I recently moved with my husband, daughter, and 2 dogs. We're doing great. We are loving the Portland life after years of being in the South. The summers are pretty dreamy here in the 80s, dry and no bugs.
Yes, definitely the no mosquitoes from North Carolina.
Which, if you're from the South, you know what I'm talking about. And there's really an outdoor culture here, lots of parks, and we're enjoying getting outside a lot more here.
Cool. Yeah, no, we still got to come up and visit with you. So we're definitely going to come and crash into your second room here in the near future.
Can't wait.
So let's start talking about your house hacking experience. Like, I know a lot of the story really well, but our listeners don't. So could you actually just sort of start with this high-level summary of what you did for your house hack?
Sure. So my husband and I moved to Durham in 2012, and we bought a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house with a 2-car garage and a workspace above the garage there was nothing in that workspace. And I don't even know what the previous owners were using it for, maybe storage. And we had it in our minds that eventually we were going to turn that workspace into an apartment someday and rent it out. And so we had spent over a year traveling around and staying in other people's Airbnbs in Barcelona and London, and Costa Rica, and East Coast and West Coast. And so when we moved to Durham, we decided that we wanted to start renting out our house on Airbnb too, and just continue doing some of our traveling lifestyle. So it kind of morphed over time, but that's how it originally started.
Cool. So let's really dig in then. So when you bought the house, what year did you actually end up closing on this 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house?
So it was 2012. And then pretty much right away, we started renting out our house on Airbnb, really just, waiting until we got kind of a tempting offer. So like if somebody wanted to rent for a week, we would just go visit friends for a week, throw our dogs in the back of the car, and basically almost make enough to pay our mortgage for the month. So that's kind of how it started. And we did that for about a year. And so do you want to talk about the numbers?
Yeah. One question first, though, is, I obviously know you and your husband well, but like at that time when you were looking at that house, were you specifically thinking we're buying this house to do Airbnb, or is it we like this area, it's really a house for us, and we can also just put it on Airbnb as sort of this side thing?
We loved the house. So the house itself was so charming. It was in an old established neighborhood with huge trees. The house was built in 1927, and it just had a beautiful open flow to the way the space was laid out. And so the house itself was really beautiful. The property was 1/3 of an acre, and then it's pretty unusual in that area to have such a big garage, but the previous owners had built this massive garage, 2-car garage, which we only had one car. So it was like a huge amount of space. So yes, we bought it thinking, in fact, when we bought it, we got a couple of quotes from builders just to get the sense of what it would cost to build out the apartment inside. Of course, the quotes that we got were much less than it ended up costing us down the line, but we were just using that as a gauge to think about, okay, well, what would it cost if we do this eventually?
Yeah, just thinking down the road, yeah.
Thinking down the road, but so that was 2012. We didn't do anything about it until 2014. But yes, that was sort of in the back of our minds, like eventually, someday, this might make sense to do when we can afford to do it. We spent all of our money buying a house to start. So
that's usually the way most people do, right? Is you spend most of your money buying the house, but you bought it because you really loved it. Do you remember back in 2012? That's sort of just as the real estate market was really just starting to creep up. Do you remember roughly what you paid for it, and what type of loan did you actually get for the property?
We paid $315,000, and it actually had sat on the market. We saw it when we were still living in San Francisco, and I said, "Oh my God, I love that place. I want to buy it right now." But fortunately, they had overpriced it, and so it actually sat on the market for about 6 months. And this was really before the boom in Durham too. So we kind of got in right before things exploded there. So $315,000 was what we paid for the house. It was a 30-year loan. And was your other question? It was fixed rate.
30-year fixed rate. And did you do like an FHA loan, or did you do just a normal conventional loan where you had to put down 10, 20%?
Normal.
Okay, normal loan.
Conventional, and we put down 20%.
And do you remember roughly what your mortgage was at that time?
I think it was 1,400 and something, and it's gone up over time to 1,500 and something, I believe. So it was, compared to what we were paying in the other places we were living. We were moving from San Francisco.
Oh yeah, I can only imagine how much you're paying in San Francisco. And now you're like, oh, mortgage $1,400. This is pretty awesome.
I think that my husband was paying for his apartment. I think he had been paying about $1,200 for his apartment in San Francisco. So $1,400, which was like a 1-bedroom apartment, and then I think I was paying like $1,000 at mine. So yeah, obviously much more affordable to be in Durham.
Yeah. And that $1,400, was that with the taxes and insurance, or was that separately?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
and that's
that was
why
all
it
in.
went up to the $1,500 as insurance, and the taxes increased over the year. That the payments crept up to that $1,500.
Exactly. I don't think the insurance has changed, but I know the taxes did.
Okay. All right. So you're in the house. You love this place. You're already saving money coming from San Francisco. Now you've been using Airbnb all over the world, and now you're like, hey, let's actually do Airbnb. Was this your idea, your husband's idea? Was there some convincing back and forth that had to happen?
You know what? I think it might have been more my idea. I'm kind of, as you mentioned at the beginning, a serial entrepreneur. So, and my husband was on board with it. I did most of the work for it. I did, all of the communication with the guests and kind of all of the coordination before and after. So he was down for it. For a certain period of time, and we'll get into that part later. But yeah, I think we did it for maybe a little over a year, and it's a lot when it's in your own space.
Yeah. So you were literally just, you get someone that want to stay for a week, and then you'd be like, okay, now we got to figure out where we want to travel or find someone else to go stay with for the week.
Yeah, pretty much. And it's not like it would be, it usually would be well planned out. Like, somebody would want to stay in the spring, and so we would then decide we want to visit our friends in California, or something like that. So it wouldn't usually be like, oh, we got a request, we got to leave tomorrow.
Okay, so you could really just plan for it.
We could plan it out much further in advance. So it was a fairly comfortable scenario, as comfortable as it is for someone to be staying in your house.
Absolutely. All right, so you're doing this for the year. You're planning out ahead. It's sort of a cool way, though, if you're like, hey, I know, let's advertise for bookings in the spring if we're in the fall, and then we'll just plan our life around it several months out. And most people want to do a vacation, visit family, visit friends, do a Disney World, or travel to another country. And if you know you have that longer booking, then just build your travel on it. So I mean, to me, it makes a
Yep.
lot of sense. So, do you roughly remember over that first year what you were making per month from Airbnb, or maybe over that first year? So, if your mortgage is 1,400 ish, you're what, like 18 grand a year total in your housing costs? And
Right.
do you know what you were bringing in roughly from Airbnb?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it was probably somewhere around $15,000 because again, we were still living in the house. So, and we probably weren't renting it out for more than a week per month.
Okay.
Yeah. So we were close to making what we needed for our mortgage.
Yeah, but still, I
But
mean, if
not quite. No, it's great.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you're over here in San Francisco, separate apartments, higher cost of rent. Now you're in
Yep.
Durham, North Carolina. You got this beautiful 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home, giant garage, third of an acre, and you're doing
Yep.
Airbnb on average a week a month. And at every step, it's like high cost of living, more savings, lower cost of housing, and now you're cutting out 70% of your housing costs. So I mean, that right there is a
Yep.
pretty fantastic win.
Yeah. It was a really good way to start things out for sure.
So what actually changed then? So you said, yeah, this was great for a while until it wasn't. So it sounds like something here sort of changed.
Well, I mean, we didn't have any horrible experiences by any means, but I think it just got kind of taxing, leaving and getting the house prepared each time and doing the communication before, during, and after. And I mean, just doing that over and over again. I mean, we had great ratings. People loved our house. And in fact, we even had film crews rent our house out for commercials. So we had it was overall a good experience, but I think we just started thinking like, maybe now is like, we don't want to do this for the long term. This is pretty taxing. Like, we both also worked full time.
Yeah.
So, on top of doing this Airbnb thing, we were both also working full time. Granted, we worked remotely, but I mean, it was still a lot. So, it wasn't really a sustainable thing. It wasn't something we were going to do forever. So that's kind of when we started thinking like, okay, now's probably the time when we can, and because we were putting money away, start thinking about doing our apartment project above the garage, which we then started in 2013. So
Okay, so it worked well for a year, it started getting old, you saved some of
yeah,
that money over that time, and now you're like, all right, let's actually do this apartment thing out back above the garage. And was the garage detached, or was it an attached to the main building?
the garage was detached. So our goal was, and why we thought it would work well, is that we could actually create a separate private entrance, the apartment faced away from the house, and you could kind of create even like a separate little yard for the apartment, so that it would actually feel like a separate property. So that was our goal. And so, yeah, in 2013, we started talking to GCs. And, as I mentioned, when we looked at the house to begin with and we're going through the purchasing process, we had gotten a couple of quotes from GCs. Well, now that it's 2 years, almost close to 2 years later, and the housing market is booming in Durham, GCs have become a bit more expensive.
Yeah, yeah.
And we started getting quotes and getting referrals from people. And we ended up finding some architects who were friends of friends, and then a GC referral through them. Began working with them in 2013. And the space above the apartment, or the space above the garage, rather, was about 550 square feet. So it wasn't huge,
Yeah.
but it was big enough for to become a one bedroom apartment. We originally looked at maybe it being a studio, but we thought one bedroom would kind of give more value to it and just more flexibility for whoever lived there.
Okay, cool. So you found some good architects, you found some contractors. Roughly what did it cost you to actually expand this space and unfinished space and turn it into a 1-bedroom apartment? And then how long did that process roughly take?
So I believe it took, so of course, originally it was supposed to only take maybe 3 or 4 months. I think it probably took quite close to twice that long. Part of the reason is because once we got into the process of the build, we both got really interested in it. we spent a lot of time making the space super efficient because it was so small, and just doing a lot of research about how to do small space as well. Just chose really nice fixtures and made it really, really nice, like nicer than our own house. so part of what happened is that we spent more than we originally were going to, because we were having fun with it. And in that process, and I'd say maybe 3/4 of the way through the process, we were like, I think we're building this for ourselves. So we kind of finished it off, and sort of plans changed along the way. And we decided, like, I think we can maybe just live in this ourselves for a little while.
So you were like building it, picking out finishes, picking out stuff that was really your taste, and then all of a sudden you realize, like, hey, we're actually going to live in this. And so now you're thinking, yes, we're going to give up the 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom main house and go live in the tiny house.
We're going to go live in the tiny house. Where we were going to try it for a year, because we knew we could make a lot more money on our 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house, as we'd already figured out from doing Airbnb. So that cost us, so what we originally thought was going to be about $60,000 cost us about $80,000.
Okay.
Yeah, and that took I'd say it took somewhere between 7 and 9 months, something like that.
And then did you just have savings for that, or how'd you end up covering some of those costs to actually cover that?
So we did have some savings just from, having rented the house out and working and living in a place where the cost of living was lower. So we'd been able to save some for the past year and a half. But we also had a home equity line of credit, a HELOC, and I think we had, I want to say $50,000 or $60,000 in that. And so we did use that whole line of credit, and then we used our savings for the rest of whatever the line of credit didn't cover, and then paid that line of credit down over the next 3 years from the rent that we were making on the house and the apartments.
Awesome. So did it take any convincing for your husband to live in this tiny space, or was this his idea? Or like, I mean, I know if I were to tell my wife we're going from a 3-bedroom place to 500 square feet, I wouldn't be living anymore.
It was more his idea, and he had to convince me.
So here you are, first convincing him to do the Airbnb, and now he's convincing you, like a role reversal, like, oh, let's go live in this tiny space.
Yeah, as long as I've known him, he's been obsessed with tiny houses. So, we actually got to experience living in a tiny house together. And, fortunately, the way that we laid out that space, it was a 1-bedroom, so there could be some separation. And he now had a remote working office in downtown Durham that he was going to daily. So we weren't both working from a tiny little house together. I think that would have killed it. But no, I think it came along at the right time. So yes, he had to convince me, and I agreed to do it sort of as an experiment and to make more money for a year, because it was a really nice apartment.
Yeah.
And so, that's what we tried it out for a year, and it went well. And then we did it for a second year. So we lived in it for 2 years total.
Awesome. So you moved out of the big house into the small, tiny house above the garage. And then what'd you do with the main house? Did you keep doing Airbnb for the main house, or did you put in a long-term tenant?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure that after we moved into the apartment, we went straight into long-term tenants, because we had quite a bit of experience with Airbnb at that point, and we kind of just wanted to cruise for a while. So actually what happened was the house was still up on Airbnb, and so we had somebody reach out to us who was from the Midwest, who was wanting to live in Durham for 6 months over the winter, because their son and daughter-in-law lived in Durham, and so they wanted to get another house that was close to them, not living with them for that period of time. But they found us on Airbnb, and then we kind of did an off Airbnb deal some of it through Airbnb and some of it not. And so that ended up working out really well because they still found us through Airbnb, but we weren't actually doing, the high traffic Airbnb situation that we were doing before. And we really liked that. And we ended up being pretty good friends with them. They were an older couple, probably late 60s, early 70s, but they were awesome. We had a great time with them. Really happy that we did that. It was a really good first experience into having long-term renters in the house. And then I think from there, we might have done a few months of Airbnb in between, and then we had another set of long-term renters for 9 or 10 months after that. So, 2 years of almost the whole time long-term renters, maybe a tiny bit of Airbnb to kind of fill in the holes.
So when you didn't have those sort of filling in the holes with the Airbnb, I know you found that first tenant from Airbnb. Where'd you actually find the other tenants? How'd you actually market it for rent?
I think it was Airbnb again, but I also had it up on Craigslist.
Okay.
And I've had really good luck with Craigslist and Zillow Rental Manager since then. So that's really the only two places that I post it. Zillow Rental Manager ends up posting it to multiple different places like Hot Pads and Trulia and some other, I can't even remember now. But so really I just end up posting it on Craigslist and Zillow Rental Manager when it comes to long-term rentals. But I have found that Airbnb still works okay for putting it out there for a long-term rental too. Like sometimes you find somebody, what kills you on Airbnb for a long-term is the fees.
Yeah.
It's for a long-term rental, it just doesn't make sense to do it through Airbnb because you're paying these fees on a monthly basis, but you're not really getting any service from Airbnb. You're still just paying for that initial find. Yeah. So if
you weren't using them through Airbnb, how'd you actually go about collecting rent? Was it just drop off a check and some cash, or did you use any sort of software, or was it just, shoot me money via PayPal or Venmo? And then
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, did you also do any leases? Because I know like through Airbnb, there's sort of some terms and conditions that they're agreeing to where when you're offline, did you do leases with folks, or was it just sort of on a handshake as well?
Yeah, that's right. I think the first, those tenants that we had, the first long-term tenants that we had from the Midwest, I believe we just did everything through Airbnb that first go round just because we didn't really know what we were doing. By the time we got to our second set of long-term tenants in the big house, we did have a lease at that point. And I think I found a North Carolina lease online, and then I just kind of tweaked it based on just experiences that I'd had using Airbnb, like things to look out for, things that you have to mention and bring up in a lease and make really crystal clear. So I think that the second long-term tenant that we had, we did have them sign a lease, and they were actually coming from overseas. So that was a little trickier, but we just did everything. We just passed the document back and forth online and signed it that way. And they sent us money. I think they sent us, their deposit through PayPal or something like that. So, but yeah, I definitely recommend getting, a solid lease as time goes on, and just kind of adding to it as you learn things, really is what I've done over the years.
I know. I feel like that's the way it works for a lot of us is we're like, oh, we feel like this is common sense. And then a tenant does something and you're like, well, I got to now add that as a clause in the lease. Like, don't do this.
It's not common sense.
All right. So you've been living in the small apartment, tiny house above the garage, renting the big house to longer term tenants. What were you actually averaging per month in rent that you're getting when you rented out the big house?
So we were getting between, so when it was long-term tenants, it's less, of course, between $2,200 and $2,500 a month. And then when we were doing Airbnb, those gaps in between, we were sometimes making over $3,000 a month but it's a lot more work. You have to pay more, for the cleaners. There's a lot more time that goes into it. So, after a while, I kind of realized that my time was better spent doing other things and just getting sort of that lump sum without having to do the high touch work of Airbnb.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So I just want to make sure I got this right. You were long-term tenants now getting $2,200 to $2,500 a month, and your mortgage was that $1,400 a month. Do you remember what your equity line payment was?
Let's see. Well, 60,000 divided by 36 months, something like that. I
Okay.
think we were trying to pay it off in 3 years. So I don't know. Let's do the math. So we were putting about $1,600 a month probably back into the home equity line to pay it off quickly, I think.
Okay. But your minimum payment was probably a whole lot less.
Oh, yes, absolutely. We just really wanted to pay it down
Yep.
and we could. So, and the home equity line, the rate wasn't crazy, but it wasn't amazing either. I mean, I think it was somewhere around, it started low. That's kind of how they get you sometimes. Like it starts really low for the first 12 months and then it goes up. So I think it was maybe somewhere around 6%. So it was something that we wanted to pay off quickly if we could.
Yeah. All right. So your first mortgage was $1,400. You probably had a small couple $100 a month minimum payment for the equity line. And I know some folks like or don't mind having debt as leverage for real estate, and then other folks like to pay it down. It sounds like you took that approach, but even on your minimum payment, you're maybe $1,700, $1,800 a month, and you guys are bringing in $2,200 to $2,500 a month in rent. I mean, you're literally what, like
Right.
high cost of living area in San Francisco, cheaper housing costs in Durham, to now having 70-80% of it covered that first year when you're Airbnb. You finish building out the small apartment above the garage, and now all your housing costs are getting covered, and you're having extra to rapidly pay down this equity line. I mean, that's pretty phenomenal, the fact that, just over these short several years can really change your financial position of going from high cost of living area to now having all your housing costs completely covered.
Totally. Yeah, it totally changed our lives. Absolutely. Yeah, it wasn't a 180 because we were doing okay before, but I mean, it really did. It just accelerated our kind of financial well-being, really.
Yeah. All right. So you lived I know you alluded to that you lived in the tiny apartment for about 2 years. So it sounds like there's a change that happened around this point. Yep. Tell me a little bit about that change.
Well, the change was that I got pregnant in 2016, and we decided that we couldn't live with 3 people and 2 dogs in 550 square feet.
That would have been tough. That would have been tough.
I mean, people do it, but here we have like this really nice 1,800 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house. And, after you have a kid, people want to come visit you. It's very hard for people to come visit you when you're living in a 1-bedroom apartment.
Yes.
So anyway, we decided when I was, I don't know, I was probably 3 or 4 months pregnant when it was like, yeah, we're definitely going to move back into the house when, before I gave birth. And so yeah, when I was 8 months pregnant and the long-term renters were leaving, the overseas long-term renters were leaving, then we moved back to the house when I was 8 months pregnant. So just in time. And kind of got the house sorted out again and got everything ready for the baby. And then, speaking of like how like this new financial stability could help change our lives, my husband was actually able to take his 90 days of paternity leave off. And his company, unfortunately, gives 0 pay for fathers, which is crazy, but they are required to give him his 90 days off. So that was something that we were able to do. He was able to take 90 days unpaid because of because of this house hack that we did.
It's pretty amazing that gave you that opportunity to say, like, while I just gave birth, the husband is able to stay home for 90 days, not getting paid, and we know we're in a good place because we just had this really great period of time with the house hack. So you left the tiny apartment, you're in the big house, you now got a young baby. Did you rent the garage apartment?
Yes. So I had that lined up while we still had our long-term tenants in the big house. And basically like the day we moved out of the apartment, we had somebody else moving in. And that tenant actually was there for 3 years, which was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, if you can get any tenant for 3 years, that is really, really good. It keeps your turnover cost really low.
Yes.
What was she actually paying for rent when she was in that sort of tiny apartment?
So she was paying, the way that we had it had it set up, she was paying $13.75, and that covered all of her utilities. And also, we provided once a month cleaning, professional cleaning. So when we were going through the build of the apartment, we were given the option of separating the meters. And it was going to be over $5,000 for the separate water meter, which we just never would have made back. I mean, maybe if we were in the house for like decades, but it just didn't make sense to install that, especially since we were building a brand new apartment and everything was really energy efficient. So we just decided not to do that. So anyway, the end result was that all of our utilities were tied together between the house and the apartment. And so we just paid for her utilities and we just rolled that into the cost of the rent. But to make it more attractive, I mean, it's kind of like when people see $13.75 for a one bedroom apartment, they might balk at that number. But if since I think we listed it at $11.75 was the rent, and then we said, $200 is for utilities and cleaning. So because of that, it made it kind of seem like the rent was lower, or feel like the rent was lower.
Yeah.
But in actuality, we just kind of presented it in a different way. So that's what she was paying, and I think we increased it every year. I think by $25.
Yeah. Why try to raise it so much and scare off a really good tenant if
Yeah,
they do the same
it was
thing.
fine.
If I like the tenants, they pay on time, they're good, they don't cause problems. Just do a minor increase, and then it's better to keep a good tenant than it is to.
Exactly. So we just went up by $25 a month and she was fine with that. So, and that was fine. That was still, that still almost paid for our mortgage. So it was still a great deal for us.
So you'd used your savings, paid off that savings that you had when you were renting out the big house, rapidly pay off that equity line. So now you're back in the big house and this is almost covering your mortgage. I mean, this is a really cool house hacking experience. Like, this property essentially grew with you as you went on in life. It was like, oh, we're younger, we don't mind, moving out for Airbnb, we'll do that. Then it's like, we're getting a little further along in our careers, we don't want that hassle, so now let's do, the small apartment, we can try that out, we'll rent the big house. Now we're having our first child, let's go back to the big house and switch it around and rent that other one. And like, I'm almost speechless. This is a really, really cool story. And it's so cool how it changed with you through these different periods of life.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, it was a really interesting journey, and it really did. It really did grow with us, and it really did. We were able to have that flexibility because of the type of property that we bought to begin with, that it already had some of these existing things, but that we were able to add to it. Yeah, it was a great situation. It really was. I mean, it was something, if I could replicate again, I would.
Yeah. Yeah. So you obviously mentioned you're in the Pacific Northwest. This property is back in Durham, North Carolina. So what's this transition period here? Did you end up selling the house? Are you still keeping it? Turn it into a full rental? What's the current situation now?
Yeah, so we are renting it. So we got another tenant for the apartment. Our tenant of 3 years finally moved out. She was going to go buy her own house, which I totally understand and applaud her for. So we got another tenant for the apartment, and then we got actually a family from San Francisco moved into the main house, and so they're there right now. And we did that because we moved to Portland. I mean, this was just like a leap of faith that we took, that we were going to love Portland. And so our idea was that we were just going to rent out the house and the apartment for a year and see how we felt about Portland, and either have it as an option to come back to Durham if we wanted to, but also like rent is more expensive here. So this covers, we're basically in the exact same financial situation we were in Durham out in Portland, because we're now renting the house out too. So it's basically like
it just went even one step further.
Like, I know.
All these different life periods. And now it's helping you live in the perfect, oh my goodness. Yeah. Talk about awesome experience. Like, I don't think there's a better case study example for like how a house hack can work and carry you through all these positions. That's so awesome.
It's true. It's true. So we'll do that for this year and we'll kind of see, but certainly it's a lot more expensive to be out in Portland and Pacific Northwest in general than it is to be in Durham. Although because, we kind of moved there before Durham exploded, our house has appreciated a lot. So speaking of how it can continue to help us when we do sell, our house has appreciated a lot, and we will use that to put a nice down payment on something here, which, would be, it's the price points here are for what we have there are, we're looking at more like if we were to buy a house like what we have in Durham in Portland, it would probably cost us between eight and $900,000.
Yeah,
So,
that's just
yeah,
crazy high prices.
yeah,
So,
yes.
do you think you'll sell? Because I know you're really savvy, but are you familiar? If you have lived in it for 2 of the past 5 years, you can still sell it and not have to pay any capital gains tax on that appreciation. So, is that sort of your thought process of try out Portland, and then if we're going to stay, make sure we sell under that window so we don't have to pay capital gains?
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So, yes, it would be within 3 years that we would sell it if we were going to sell. Although, I looked at our specific numbers, and the capital gains for this sale wouldn't be huge. I think it's something like $30,000. So it's not like a game changer, but it is. It's definitely something to consider. So yes, if we want to avoid that, we'd be selling within 3 years.
Really cool. So if you sort of think back through this whole house hack experience, what do you feel like your major sort of success was, or your biggest win was out of this period of time?
I'd say the experience of doing it. This was my first project like this, and the experience of doing it, and also just creating this ongoing financial stability for us was huge. I'd say that, we went on to do other real estate projects after that, but I'd say this one was probably the one that had the most positive impact on our lives, like directly. So yeah, I think it was a great first experience, but also nothing since then has been as good.
Yeah.
I don't think.
Well, that's a hard deal to live up to, though. So
it's a high bar. It's a high bar. So yeah, definitely a great experience.
All right. So while you're still thinking back over this period, what do you think your biggest challenge was? Or if there's something you could go back and change and do differently, what could that actually be?
I think the biggest challenge was learning to work with contractors and subcontractors for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
Having never done that before. The process is this sort of hurry up and wait scenario over and over again, where we would have to make these major decisions on the fly with no warning. And this is just so different than any other industry, and just shockingly inefficient. So, but these are just industry standards for construction, and just to have to learn that. And you can try to change. We really did our best to try to work around that and change that whenever we could, meaning, we would have conversations with our GC about okay, well, what's next? What information can we give you? We want to be prepared. We're planning ahead. What do you need? And even though we did that over and over again, there were things that he couldn't foresee either, because he's working with subcontractors who don't give him any warning. So anyway, it was just that experience was a huge challenge for my husband and I, who we are both self-proclaimed planners. So to not be able to plan really was pretty frustrating. But then, once we sort of knew that, we knew for our next project, well, this is normal. This is just kind of the way it is, unfortunately. But that's what it is, and we learned that through the process.
Cool. And would you actually do another house hack again?
If it's the right scenario. So, as I mentioned before, one of the reasons that our house hack works so well for us is because the apartment really felt separate from our property, with its own private entrance, facing away from our house, its own little yard, essentially. Yeah, if we could find something like that. It's interesting because we've been looking at stuff here in Portland, and a lot of people do accessory dwelling units here, ADUs for short. They do them all the time here because it really helps. It really does help your housing costs. So they've they were hip to that a long time before we were. So a lot of these houses have ADUs in the basement, which that that is not a very appealing scenario to us, because somebody living right underneath you that is kind of hearing a lot of what's going on upstairs
Especially
is
with the young
definite,
child running around and
especially
playing, and yeah, I can
totally.
definitely.
And two dogs, and so anyway, it's just a lot. That's a lot more intimate than we would prefer it to be. So if it just depends, if it's the right scenario, we'd love to do it again. So we'll just have to see if we can find that.
Very cool. Well, hopefully you'll find that right scenario there. Now,
Yeah.
before we let our guests go, we like to ask all of them a set of final 6 questions that we like to call
The Famous 6.
What's your favorite personal finance blog, book, or podcast that you've read or listened to recently?
Okay, well, I am not done reading it yet, so I have to be honest about that, but I'm almost done reading it, and I really like it so far. The book Invested by Danielle Town. And it's about learning how to invest in companies that align with your values while understanding the mistakes that most people make while interacting with the stock market. And she's our age, and the tone of the book is very approachable. And I think it's been a fun read and an easy read, and really just like accessible as far as understanding stocks
Oh,
and
very cool.
what
I'm going to have to add
research is.
that to
Yeah,
my reading list, and I'll throw that in the show notes for anyone that's interested in learning more about it. All right, so
nice.
number 2, what's your favorite real estate related blog or book or podcast that you've read or listened to recently?
So I don't listen to a lot of real estate podcasts, but I have listened to quite a few episodes of Jake and Gino, and they have a multifamily. I think multifamily is in the title of their podcast, but honestly, they hit all sorts of topics that have to do with real estate, and I've really found it useful for other projects that we've done.
Very cool. All right, so number 3, what's been your favorite travel destination so far?
My favorite so far, I think, has been the North Island of New Zealand. The whole country really prides itself on taking care of its natural beauty, and the North Island is full of like all these geothermal wonders. So, meaning like lots of hiking to hot springs in the middle of nowhere, and they
Oh,
just
yeah.
have this incredible, yeah, just like an incredibly diverse landscape. So that was pretty awesome.
Well, I know you're a big traveler, so this should be easy. What's going to be next on your travel vacation list?
So we're going to Maui in the winter.
Oh, yeah,
We're
that'll
going to
be
go
a good
see some
one.
friends. Yeah, we're going to go see some friends who just moved there, but then we're also going to have like a week on our own. We've chosen to stay on a beach that turtles really like to hang out, which my daughter is going to just be super excited about. So, and it's easier to get there. And now that we're in Portland, I mean, it's like a pretty pretty quick flight versus from the East Coast. So we'll need to have a nice sunshine break in the middle of the Portland winter, which will be
Cool.
great.
All right, so number 5, what is your biggest bucket list item that you haven't accomplished yet?
That I haven't accomplished yet. Okay. Let's see. So um, I I began trail running about a year ago, and I've been running longer and longer distances. So I think my next bucket list item would be to find a half marathon race somewhere abroad and just plan a trip around that. And I'm still working on the race and what I'll choose, but that's sort of my next adventure that I'm going to plan around.
Well, I like it. It's not only do you want to run the half marathon, but you're going to pick a different country to go do it in. So you get to
Yeah,
do that hurdle and go see
yeah,
another country. Awesome. Yeah, that's a
exactly.
good bucket
Yeah.
list item. All right, and number 6, final question. What is your favorite life hack?
Yeah, this is a good one. So, beginning in 2019, I started working towards the companion pass on Southwest Airlines. And, since we have to pay for our daughter now that she's over 2 years old, it's a bit more expensive to travel these days. So, mid 2019, we received our companion pass. So, we now have it for the remainder of 2019 and 2020. And we've already gotten her 4 free flights. So, it's super valuable. And we did that through Chase. And there's actually another website that I can recommend around that has given me really good tips on how to do that. It's called the Points Guy. And yeah, I mean that's a good life hack that kind of it's like it keeps on giving. So we plan on doing it for 2021 if we can as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I actually love the points guy, and I'll link to the website in the show notes. I follow it religiously. But did you actually see earlier this year they bought out another website called Mommy Points, where it's specifically a woman that basically, you know, the points guy, it's really expanded, but it's really more for that traveler. I don't have, it's just me and my wife. We have no kids yet, but I love having and hearing her perspective of here's how we travel with the kids and here's how we use all the rewards and stuff.
Cool.
So I thought it was really interesting that they sort of did this acquisition merger together.
That's awesome. No, I'm going to have to look that up.
Well, Cami, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate your story. I mean, it was just phenomenal of how you had this really long house hack that shifted as you sort of changed and went through different parts of your life. I mean, I feel like it really is the perfect case study of how a house hack should work and does work if you do everything just right and have a little luck thrown in. So thank you again for being on the show.
Well, thank you. It was super fun to share that story.
Awesome. Thank you again.
Thank you for listening to the House Hacking Podcast. For more up-to-date information on house hacking, to access links and resources mentioned in today's show, and connect with a guest and host, head over to www.fibrei.com. That's www.fibrei.com, where your house hacking journey begins.